Right, the first part of the lesson today was about adding and subtracting fractions with common denominators, and now all the ones in this part do not have common denominators. And as we know, when we add and subtract fractions, getting a common denominator is the first step. And that common denominator of the denominators is what we call the least common multiple. So I want to practice first finding the least common multiple so we're more comfortable with it when we start adding and subtracting. So what we've done a lot this year with factoring is greatest common factor, but that's not what we want. The greatest common factor is the largest number that divides into both, but that's not what we're looking for here. So with least common multiple, and I'm not saying you have to write it out this way every time, but just something to think about, the multiples of 12 would be 12, 24, 36, 48, 60, right? The multiples of 20 would be 20, whoops, except I wrote a 24, a 20, 40, 60, 80, and the smallest one they both have in common is 60. So 60 is your least common multiple. All right, let's try this again with 15 and 25. Well, multiples of 15 would be 15, 30, 45, 60, 75. Multiples of 25 would be 25, 50, 75, 100. So the smallest one they both have in common is 75. That's your least common multiple. So with numbers, you don't necessarily have to write it out like that each time, but that's what you need to be thinking about, the smallest multiple that they both have in common. Now, on the next ones, we have variables. And we have variables, you just kind of have to think about it differently than when it's just numbers. With the variables, you need to make sure that everything is included. So, on number 3, the least common multiple of 7 and 21, well, multiples of 7 would be 7, 14, 21. 21 would be 21, 42. So the least common one would be 21. Okay, so that would be for the numbers, but now with the variables, we want everything included. So the first one has 1x and the other has 2x. Greatest common factor, we take the least. Least common multiple, we're taking the most. Well, I have to include everything, so there has to be 2 x's. They both have 1 y, so I just have 1 y. That would be my least common multiple. Number 4. Now, these are not factors, they're groups because they have plus or minuses, so they each represent one thing. The least common multiple, everything has to be represented, so it's going to be x minus 4 times x plus 2. This whole thing is the least common multiple. Number 5, before we figure out the least common multiple, everything has to be factored, and this first term can be factored. I can take out a greatest common factor of 2, and I get n minus 2. And then this is its own group, which is n plus 2. In the least common multiple, everything has to be represented. So I have a 2, I have an n minus 2, and an n plus 2. This whole thing is the least common multiple. Last but not least, I'm going to factor that because I can't figure out the least common multiple until it's factored. So I've got x and x, the two numbers that multiply to negative 14 and add to 5 would be 7 and negative 2. This one is just x minus 2, x minus 2. So everything has to be included in the least common multiple. So I have an x plus 7. This has 1 x minus 2, and this has 2, so I have to include 2 of them because everything has to have representation in the least common multiple. Okay, let's practice adding and subtracting. Let's start with ones that you should know. So on the first one, our least common multiple of 4 and 7 would be, well, 4 would be 4, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28. 7 would be 7, 14, 21, 28. So 28 would be the least common multiple. So on the first fraction, to make it a 28, 4 times what would be 28? Well, it would be 7. So I have to multiply this first one by 7. And on the second one, to make 7 a 28, I have to multiply it by 4. So I'm going to multiply the bottom by 4 and then the top by 4. Hold on, we'll get OneNote to cooperate, then we'll finish. Okay. You think it's working and then it's not. Okay, so on the first one, 3 times 7 is 21, and 4 times 7 gives me 28. On the other one, 5 times 4 is 20, and 7 times 4 is 28. Now that they have common denominators, now we can add them together and keep the common denominator, and then we add what's in the numerator. 21 plus 20 is 41. Now, if this would reduce, then we reduce, but it doesn't, so we're just going to leave it like that. Okay, number 2. As we look at number 2, common multiples, well, let's see, 6 would be 6, 12, 18, 24, 8 would be 8, 16, 24. So 24 is our least common multiple. So this one I have to multiply the 6 by 4. So I'm going to multiply top and bottom by 4. And then on the next one, to get 24, I have to multiply 8 by 3. So I'm going to multiply top and bottom by 3. All right, so 7 times 4 gives me 28. 6 times 4 is 24, minus 8 times 3 is 24, and 3 times 3 is 9. So when I add or subtract, I keep the same denominator, and then with this one, I'm going to subtract the numerators, which would give me 19. And if that would reduce, then I would reduce that fraction. Okay, so let's try it again, but now we've got variables in the bottom. So for our least common multiple, everything needs to be represented. So the least common multiple of the numbers would be 6. And with the variables, there's 2 a's on the one and 1 on the other, so I need the most, so I need 6a squared. That's my least common multiple. Well, this first fraction, the denominator is 6a squared, so I don't need to adjust it. But on the second fraction, to make this bottom 6a squared, I have to multiply it by 2a. So my first fraction is going to be 7 over 6a squared plus, in my second fraction, 3a times 2a is 6a squared, so the bottoms match now, and on top, 5 times 2a is 10a. Now I can add them together. So my common denominator is 6a squared, and on the bottom, I get 7 plus 10a. Now I do need to check to see if the top factors, and I can simplify it any, but it doesn't, so this will be my final answer. All right, let's see what happens on number 4. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change this minus to plus a negative, because I think later on it's really going to help us. So our least common multiple has got to represent everything. So the least common multiple of 7 and 21 would be 21. With the x's, I have 1 here and 2 here, so I'm picking the most, so I have x squared. This fraction on the right, the denominator is my least common multiple, so there's nothing I need to change, but on the one on the left, to make it 21x squared, I would have to multiply it times 3x. So on the top, 3x times 5a gives me 15ax. On the bottom, 3x times 7 is 21x squared, which is what I want, my least common multiple, and then plus negative 3a all over 21x squared. Now that I have common denominators, I can add them together, so I get 21x squared. In the top, those are not like terms, so because they're not like terms, I can't combine them, so I get 15ax minus 3a. Now, if I wanted to, when I'm done, I need to check to see if anything simplifies, and I do that by factoring the numerator. Well, it's kind of a weird one, but I can take out a greatest common factor of 3a, and that leaves me with 5x minus 1 all over 21x squared. Now in the bottom, there's no group, so there's nothing that's going to cancel with the 5x minus 1. But the a's and x's, they can't simplify either, but the 3 and 21, yeah, it can simplify. So my final answer is a times 5x minus 1 over 7x squared. All right, next page of the notes. Number 5. Okay, they do not have common denominators, so to be able to add and subtract them, I need to create common denominators. So first I want to figure out what my least common multiple is. The least common multiple includes everything. So it's got x plus 5 and x plus 4. This first fraction, it doesn't have the x plus 4, so I'm going to need to multiply top and bottom times x plus 4. Totally kidding. That's not plus 4, that's minus 4, isn't it? Let's try that again. Okay, the second fraction, it's missing the x plus 5. So I'm going to multiply top and bottom times x plus 5. So my denominator is the least common multiple, x minus 4, x plus 5. On the top, I need to distribute. So that's going to give me 3x minus 4 plus over here, x minus 4, x plus 5. And now I distribute, and I get 4x plus 5. Now I have common denominators. Now I can add the numerators. So let's put this up here. My denominator stays the same, which is the least common multiple. My numerator, whoops, I wrote 4 when I meant to write 5. My numerator, I combine like terms. So 3x and 4x is 7x, negative 4 and 5 is 1. Now, I need to check to see if the numerator is going to factor to see if anything will simplify, but 7x plus 1 is not going to factor, so I'm done. Number 6, my least common multiple includes everything, so it's going to have a y plus 5 and a y minus 3. So this first fraction is missing the y minus 3, so I need to multiply both by y minus 3. The second fraction is missing the y plus 5, so I need to multiply both times y plus 5. Now before I do this, I'm going to change this to plus and negative because it's really going to help me with my signs later. So the first fraction, my denominator is the least common multiple, y plus 5, y minus 3, and now I need to take y times this binomial, so that gives me y squared minus 3y, plus, now over here, I'm going to multiply everything by negative 3y. Or negative 3, excuse me. So that gives me negative 3y, and then negative 3 times 5 is negative 15, all over the least common multiple. Now that I've rewritten the fractions, now I can combine them together. So my denominator is the least common multiple. With my numerator, now I'm going to combine like terms. So that gives me y squared, negative 3y and negative 3y is negative 6y, and then minus 15. Now I need to check to see if the top factors, to see if I can simplify in it. But there's nothing that multiplies to 15 or negative 15 and adds to negative 6, so this cannot be simplified further. So that is my final answer. Okay, let's take a look at number 7. On number 7, I have to find my least common multiple, but to do that, I have to first factor. So in this, I can take out the greatest common factor of 3, and I get x minus 3. So my least common multiple has to include everything. So 3 times x minus 3. This first fraction, the denominator is exactly what I need, so I don't need to change anything. I'm going to multiply the second fraction, though, by a 3 because I need to add that to the denominator. So my first fraction stays the same, 5 over the least common multiple. My second fraction, 3 times 3 is 9, over the least common multiple, which is 3 times x minus 3. Now that the denominators are the same, now I can add the numerator. 9 plus 5 is 14. Now, if 14 and 3, because this 3 is an individual, it's not a group, if these could reduce, I could reduce them. Let's say if that top was a 15, but with it being 14 and 3, it's not going to reduce. There's my final answer. All right, let's try and get 2 more in. Number 8, to be able to figure out the least common multiple, I need to factor the bottom. So this is going to be a plus 5, a minus 5. Well, the least common multiple then includes everything, which is going to be a plus 5, a minus 5. The second fraction has everything it needs, but the first fraction on the left is missing the a plus 5. So I'm going to multiply top and bottom by a plus 5. When I do that on the first fraction, the denominator is the least common multiple. On the top, negative 3 times a is negative 3a, and then I get negative 15 plus. Over here, this one didn't need to change, so it stays the same. Now that my denominator is the same, now I can combine like terms. So when I do that, I get negative 3a, negative 15 and 5 is negative 10, and then over here I get a plus 5 over a minus 5. That's my final answer. Now on the top, I could factor out a negative 1, but it won't reduce with anything that's on the bottom, so it's really not going to help me too much. Okay. Let's look at 9 and 10. I'm not going to do the whole problem for you, but I just want to get it set up to think about it. On the number 9, I've got to factor this to find my least common multiple. So this would be x plus 4 times x minus 4. So my least common multiple is going to be x plus 4 times x minus 4. So what I'm going to have to do on the first fraction, it's missing the x plus 4. So I'm going to multiply top and bottom by that. Okay, and then you could proceed from there. But what I want you to be careful with is because this is a minus, you're subtracting everything on that top parentheses. So I'm going to change it to a plus, and then I'm going to change the sign of everything on the top. On the last one, our least common multiple, well, I got to factor this first. What multiplies to negative 18 and adds to 3? Well, 6 and negative 3. So my least common multiple is going to be x plus 6 times x minus 3. So I have to multiply the second fraction times x plus 6 because that's what's missing. Now over here, there's nothing I need to change on the left. But on the right, when I multiply this, I'm going to have x times x, which is x squared, and then 6x, and then 2x, and then 12. So there's a little bit to keep track of. Next class, we're going to do more of this adding and subtracting. We're not going to stop. We're going to keep working on it next time.